Where were you when the world stopped turning on that September day? Were you at work, at home, at school, or were you even old enough to remember? These are the questions asked every year when 9/11 comes around. People flash back to the horrific events that took place on that day in 2001. It is a memorialized day, and I take part in looking back on its history every year. 9/11 started out completely normal, and then disaster struck, impacting the lives of people then and for many years after. Beginning on September 11, 2001, 19 radicals associated with the extremist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 jet airliners. They set out on a suicide mission to attack 4 prominent locations in the United States: the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and the White House. The first of the 4 buildings hit was the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 crashed into the northeast face of the tower, creating a massive hole extending from the 92nd to the 98th floor. Fireballs and smoke emerged from the building, then had made a horizontal deflection caused by the impact of the plane. Around 15 minutes later, Flight 175 crashed into the southwest face of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The plane left an impact hole extending from the 78th to the 84th floor. Large fireballs spewed out from all sides of the building. The tragic crashes of 9/11 don't stop here either. Instead, news of another plane, presumably known as Flight 77, crashed into a mainly occupied area of the Pentagon. It is still unknown today as to what really hit the Pentagon because of the lack of proof and debris. The last plane, unlike the previous ones, did not hit its intended target, the White House. Instead, Flight 93 was shot down and crashed in Pennsylvania. Speculations about whether or not passengers retook the plane were contradicted by certain eyewitness reports of it being shot down. All of these plane crashes were only the start of the day that we know as 9/11. Next thing we know, at 9:59 a.m., the portion above the crash zone on the South Tower began to tilt. Seconds after that, the top of the building began its 10-second descent and was soon swallowed by a dust cloud that only grew as the building fell to the ground. Police and civilians that were left in the building and on surrounding streets were killed or severely injured by the building collapsing, which caused a cloud of debris and cement and concrete to fill the air. If nearby people were not hit by flying debris, they were most likely inhaling the harmful dust that filled the air. As soon as people thought that they may have been clear, the second tower began its dreadful descent. There were more deaths, more debris, and more heartache. At last, the terror had ended, but only in time for the rescue and recovery. Finally, after watching such tragic events play out, the time came to rescue people and recover from the tragedy. After watching a video of the tower site, chills were sent up my spine when hearing the hundreds of firefighter radios that were beeping with no response. In the article, Rescue and Recovery on the 9/11 Memorial Site, a timeline was shown to display what and when certain events occurred during the road to recovery. Events like the last person of the 18 survivors were found alive, professional construction and credentialed recovery workers took over the operations at Ground Zero, and the last federal rescue team left Ground Zero. It was a long road to recovery, but finally, on June 25, 2002, the last truckload of debris was carried out of the World Trade Center site. That moment was one to cherish because it meant it was time to move forward and not let the tragedy hold us back. The period of a few months after 9/11 was one full of shock and mourning. It was hard to believe what had just happened to the nation. Thousands of people lost their loved ones, and those who didn't lose loved ones felt as if they might have. People from all over the country set up memorials to honor those lost. In the immediate aftermath of the attacks, the Bush administration declared war on terrorism. He said, "Americans would not expect one battle, but a lengthy campaign, unlike any other we have ever seen." He then put it into action and launched war on Afghanistan. There were stated goals of bringing Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda to justice and preventing the emergence of other terrorist networks. These goals were to be accomplished by the means of economic and military sanctions against states believed to be harboring terrorists. There would be an increase in global surveillance and intelligence sharing. This would end up costing the government billions of dollars and at that time the economy went further into the recession it was already in. Following the tax came a 4-day halt to the stock market. Kimberly Amdio, an economic expert, stated in the article how the 9/11 tax still affect the economy today, that was updated on February 22, 2016, that although the recession was officially over by November of 2001, threats of war drove the Dow down for another year, closing at 38.7% decline from its peak. Aside from the stock market issues and economic recession, the nation continued to go further into debt. In the same article by Kimberly Amdio, it is stated that the increase in defense spending led to U.S. debt crisis. Furthermore, the war on terror meant that fewer funds were available for stimulus programs to boost the nation out of that financial crisis. Less jobs were created, making less tax revenue, further boosting the debt every day. In the long run, the attacks on 9/11 brought on more than just shock and mourning to our nation. There are many lasting impacts brought on by the attacks on 9/11. As said before, less than a month after 9/11, troops invaded Afghanistan in an attempt to dismantle and bring justice to Al-Qaeda. 2 years later, in March of 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq and deposed President Saddam Hussein, who was suspected of producing weapons of mass destruction. The invasion was a key part of America's newly launched war on terror under President Bush. The military involvement in Afghanistan turned into the longest-running war in American history. The war ended officially in 2014, but U.S. involvement is still deeply entrenched there to help control the ongoing Taliban insurgency. Another form of control that the U.S. is active in is in border control. In 2002, the Bush administration created the Department of Homeland Security, which is 22 government agencies that were merged into a cabinet-level office. The agency was overseeing a massive increase in deportations that has nearly doubled since 9/11. The Secure Communities program that was established in 2008 but phased out in 2014 allowed for local law enforcement to check immigration statuses of every person booked in jail at either a county or a local level. The program had resulted in many cases of immigrants entering deportation proceedings after being stopped for minor infractions, such as not using a turn signal. Protecting the borders of the country was not the only thing we set out to accomplish. We all wanted to ensure the safety of people traveling by plane. Airports now have long airport lines for full-body scans and the occasional pat-down for random selection of people. There is screening at every commercial airport checkpoint in the country, as well as lists of individuals who could pose a threat to the safety of a flight. Some people would say that changes have made the environment safer, but would argue that it also tacks on more travel time for the average passenger. Overall, the long-lasting impacts of 9/11 attacks has made the country a virtually safer place to travel and live in. The attacks on 9/11 were something that changed the lives of people everywhere, some for worse and some eventually for better. Our nation was permanently changed in several short-term and long-lasting ways, and I believe that everyone should learn about the event and the impact of 9/11 at some point in their life. So I hope that I helped you learn a little bit about that historical day, and I hope you enjoyed the speech. Thank you.